Welcome back to State of Belief Radio, everyone. I'm Welton Gaddy. It's really unthinkable. Hundreds of schoolgirls roused from their beds, loaded into trucks, and imprisoned. The organization claiming responsibility, Boko Haram, violently opposes the education of girls and women in a self-serving and savage misinterpretation of Islamic teachings. According to Human Rights Watch, it's not the first time the group has kidnapped girls and women. The news has unfolded this week telling us that more girls have been kidnapped. But the sheer numbers have forced the world in these instances to sit up and take notice. Joining me now to talk about this crisis is the Reverend Dr. Emma Jordan-Simpson, Executive Pastor of the Concord Baptist Church of Christ in Brooklyn, New York. Reverend Jordan-Simpson, welcome to State of Belief Radio.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I'm curious, what did it do to you when you first heard this story?
Well, when I first heard this story, I felt like a whole lot of other people probably felt, which was I felt paralyzed. Yeah. I felt shock. And I think it was a reaction to the sheer numbers of girls who were reported to be kidnapped. I think when I started looking into the story more, trying to understand for myself how is this happening? How are we? How is someone kidnapping? Hundreds of girls. And then I had an opportunity to learn a little bit more about what happened before those girls were kidnapped. And I have to tell you, my first reaction was utter shock. Mm-hmm. It was shock, and I had to stop and take stock myself. Mm-hmm. I consider myself to be a citizen of this globe mm-hmm. and concerned about matters across the globe, particularly around children. And I was not aware at all about what was happening in this region in Nigeria. Mm-hmm. And so I had to take a moment for myself.
Tell us more about that. Tell us what you know about these girls and what was happening and as this transpired.
Mm-hmm. What I know is that even before these girls were kidnapped, even before that, this group, Boko Haram, slaughtered children in the weeks and months before. Mm-hmm. They slaughtered boys. They slaughtered boys and girls. They attacked educators and teachers. It is a reign of terror on their community. Mm-hmm. And I heard nothing about that in our mainstream media. We heard nothing about that. And then when this, huge number of girls meets this fate, and it begins, the story begins making its way to social media, then you get a clearer picture that these girls were in school, that there was some understanding that maybe it might not have been safe to be in school, mm-hmm. but they made the decision, the authorities made the decision for these girls to be in school to take their exams, and I don't mm-hmm. know what exam it was. Mm-hmm. And then that school was set upon by the members of Boko Haram, mm-hmm. and they literally kidnapped these girls while they were studying for their exam.
As a faith leader and as an activist, what do you see as the role of each of us in this kind of crisis? I bet all of us over the last several days have at some time or another said, this is horrible. What can we do to help impact this?
Mm-hmm. I think, first of all, we need to understand that we can do something. and it can be totally appropriate for your context. I am a pastor of a church, and so I did what was appropriate for my context. But I also, try to respond as a mother, try to respond as a member of my community. And so the first thing I did in all of those, with all of those hats on, is to talk to the people who were in my circle of influence. I wanted everyone to know that this was happening and that it was not okay. And even though the response immediately was, well, why aren't we hearing about it on the news? I began pointing people to social media sites. We don't have time to even, go into why it is that these kinds of things are reported more on social media, through social media, than they are on mainstream. But in trying to get more information about it, I kept turning people to Twitter and to Facebook, trying to help people to see we have something developing here. We don't want 20 years from now to be looking back at this and to see this as our Rwanda moment, And so I began talking to people and saying, this is not okay.
What about with your congregation? I'm interested in what kind of interaction you've had with your congregation about it.
Well, in the same there. So, in trying to help people to understand what's happening with these girls, what has happened with these girls and families a world away is horrific. But we also know, our young people, even in our own communities, experience, trauma and difficulty in the same way. What do we want? We want the same thing for those girls as we want for our own children. And so I began trying to personalize their stories. I began to lift their names and to say, Mary is precious. She's significant and she matters to God. She is God's ultimate priority. She's first on his agenda, and she should be on ours. Pick up the phone, call, email, our elected officials, our legislators. We're signing the petitions, change.org, the White House petition, trying to get President Obama's attention, and all of the petitions that, we wanted to put everything in people's hands.
Yes.
To give them some way of responding. And then one young woman in my church, an amazing young woman, organized what I think was the first rally, the first demonstration in this country. She organized this rally up at the Nigerian embassy, and she did it through social media. She said, I cannot not do something. And I don't know that what I'm about to do is the right thing, but I know that I cannot not do something.
Yeah.
It's not this issue is not being reported in mass media, but I know it.
Yes.
Their faces are before me, and I have to speak up and say this is not right.
Would you talk about the campaign, the Bring Back Our Girls campaign?
So this really is trying to amplify the voices of the girls' families in Nigeria. It's not really our campaign or anyone else's campaign. This is people across the globe who have taken up this Twitter hashtag, Bring Back Our Girls, because the mothers and the fathers in Nigeria, that is what they have been crying for. They want their daughters back. And so that hashtag has just now taken on a life, that term has taken on a life of its own. And how you see it is on Twitter. You see there are Tumblr sites, Facebook sites, and everyone is trying to amplify the voices of these parents who, for weeks, had been trying to get the attention of their own government.
Right.
And so if the world joins in with them to say, bring back our girl, and it doesn't matter to the world whether those girls are Christian, whether they are Muslim, whether they, profess any faith. What matters is that they are precious children, that their families want them back, and that what has happened is not right.
It looks like by the middle of this past week that the White House was fully alert to what was going on, and the mobilizing of the State Department to help. It looks like that there's going to be help there. You've mentioned 2 or 3 times the fact that the story outside of social media has been underreported. Do you have a hunch why that's true? I mean, it's baffling.
I think that we live in an era where a couple of things are happening. First of all, most people have such short attention spans, and they want short, consumable, short bites of story, and it's difficult to sustain their attention over time. And so we have mass media, and I'm sure, there are lots of responsible ones out there, but with mass media outlets who then feed that hunger, and then it just becomes this sort of, really crazy, dynamic of a situation there, where we have media that is focused on entertainment and sports and scandal, and maybe slip in, a story if there is enough of a demand, which I think this case in particular shows. You look at the major media outlets; they were stuck on, Sterling, and they're still stuck on Benghazi, and so they're stuck on those things. Right. But when people, average, everyday, normal people have been saying, wait a minute, what is happening with these girls? Then, and they also began reading their own social media, and the tweets that folks have been, directing their way and bombarding on their Facebook pages to say, no, this is what we want to know, what is going on. Right. Then they, sort of turn their attention to it. I think that is the age that we are in, and it requires people who care about what's happening in the world to be very intentional about how they consume and pursue information. This is an example of how you could miss, an incredible opportunity to, as a person of faith, amplify the voices of these parents, because our attention is turned elsewhere.
Dr. Jordan-Simpson, this also, and I like the emphasis that you're making, also involved here is the fact that to deal with the situation that we're seeing means looking at the immediate, but also looking forward, because the great hope for women and girls in repressive societies is education. Precisely what Boko Haram so violently opposes.
Absolutely.
Are you in touch with or working to promote the empowerment of women in African countries? Because that just has to come. Yeah.
Well, we're not directly involved in that now, although this experience certainly highlights the need for us to do that. We are very much involved in promoting education for girls, but for children, in Brooklyn, and being very clear about what that means. It means, not just sending them to classrooms. It means awakening in them the desire to question and to not accept, this world as is, but to awaken, the desire to question, and the hunger for knowledge, and to understand that the most dangerous thing that you can do for a child is to ensure that child can read, that child, pursues an education, because then they will be asking questions about why is it that, power insists that I be powerless. That is what's happening in the experience of what these girls have had to live through, and their families have had to live through. But it's also that's what's happening in many places on this globe. Is that when people learn that there is a world beyond them, and that it means something for them to be educated, it puts them in danger with the powers that be, and that's a real thing.
I've been speaking with the Reverend Dr. Emma Jordan-Simpson, Executive Pastor of the Concord Baptist Church of Christ in Brooklyn, New York. Along with many other faith leaders, she's working to raise awareness of the 230 schoolgirls held captive in Nigeria by extreme radicals. Dr. Jordan-Simpson, I appreciate you talking with us about this and helping enlighten us as well as heighten our sensitivities. It's been a pleasure to have you with us today on State of Belief Radio.
Thank you. Thank you so much.